So excited to share some of the results and feedback from our High Holiday survey, and then to let you know some of the ways that we're thinking about how we move forward from all that we've learned. One of the things I'd like to start with is just saying that it is a tremendous privilege to work in a place like Central Synagogue, which is a place that values tradition so very much, and yet nothing ever stays the same. And I think that that is actually part of, the relentless reforming that we do at Central that has helped keep us relevant for the last 180 years of our proud history. So we are constantly rethinking our ritual and our worship and policies and all sorts of things, and these things have continued to reform. We talk of ourselves as Reformed Jews, and that means it's not reformed as in past tense, but we are constantly reforming. And so this survey that we took is in that spirit, that we wanted to share with you some of the results of this survey, but we did this because we really want to rethink how can we take something which I think we do pretty well with our High Holiday services and make them even better. So I'd like to share that we started with this goal. This goal was, how do we create a powerful, community-building, transformative High Holiday worship that reflects Central's highest values as a Jewish community for as many people as possible? So this is sort of our overriding goal. And in order to kind of understand this, one of the things that you should know, the first thing we did was we gathered together a member task force, a membership task force. It was headed up beautifully and continues to be by our board member, Jeffrey Goldstein. And he has some of the members of our task force are in the room tonight, and I'm incredibly grateful for their wisdom and their leadership. We hired an outside third-party consulting firm, Adina Phillips Consulting, to do the survey, because it's important to have kind of an unbiased source and someone who's doing some of this research for us. And she started out by talking to people on our membership committee, talking to interviews with our staff team, interviews with individual congregants, and even a few focus groups with different demographics in our community. And she did all of that just to create the survey so she could know what are the questions I need to ask. Because you begin with, what are the assumptions that I'm trying to test? And we had a lot of questions and assumptions around everything from service pieces that people enjoy or want improved, to how we build community and how people feel about community, to issues around seating and space. So she did all of this work and helped put together a wonderful survey. I also want to make a shout out to our Director of Member Services, Elizabeth Brown. Where's Elizabeth? Raise your hand. She's in the back. But Elizabeth has been unbelievably instrumental in this process from the beginning all the way to fixing these slides like 10 minutes ago, up to the last minute. And so we could not have done this work without her. Of course, she's been ably, deeply guided, and by Marcia Caban, our executive director. So there's been a lot of hands in this. Our clergy team has been a part of this. Some of our executive committee, our president, Jeremy Fielding. So these are all people who kind of helped us formulate this. So with that, I want to share a couple of things about the survey. We sent out 2,500 to our 2,500 member households. We got 1,000 surveys back, which is a tremendously high response rate. That represents over 30% of our households. That already bodes really well. I would say that it was very representative of our congregation in terms of demographics, although it skewed slightly more female, slightly older, and slightly more engaged. So, but generally speaking, you can say that the things that you're going to see here represent our community pretty well. Now, I'd like to give you a couple of high-level, overall, big-picture results. And the first thing when you do a survey, if you've ever done one in your nonprofit or in your business, is a score that every survey takes, which is called your Net Promoter Score. And your Net Promoter Score is, you take the people who are considered your promoters, meaning people who strongly, deeply, evangelically will talk about your place to other people and feel not just that they agree that it's great or agree that they like the High Holidays, but they strongly agree. And so you take that number, but you take away anyone who would be your detractors. And in this case, your detractors are not just people who disagree or strongly disagree, but even people who are considered neutral. Imagine if someone said to you, how do you feel about services, High Holidays? And you went, meh. That's like neutral. That's a detractor, just so you know. So basically, anyone who strongly agrees that they like something, or in this case, it was our High Holiday experience, take away anyone who's neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. The people who are in the agree category, we don't use them at all in the scoring. And in the end, what you get is the net score. And I just want to give you some sense of how this works in the business world, because almost any business in the world who does any sense of marketing, promotion, branding has a net promoter score. And because you can have a score that goes from negative 100 to positive 100, it's considered that if you have anything that's above a 0, you already know that you have more people who like you than dislike you, which is okay, but not great, but it's considered good. If you have a net promoter score of 50 or above, it's considered really excellent. If you have a net promoter score of over 70, it's considered world class. So I wanted to give you a benchmark because we actually took a survey in 2013 with UJA. They did a Measuring for Success survey where they measured a bunch of Jewish institutions and synagogues. And you should know that the New York City synagogues that were in this survey had a net promoter score average of 43, which is actually very, very good. And we at Central Synagogue had a net promoter score in 2013 of 61, which we should feel very proud about. That's considered above excellent, and we were very happy about it. But given these numbers, which was just 6 years ago, it makes our net promoter score of this survey of 2018 even more stunning, which was that we had 96% of our congregation said they would recommend, but 81% were promoters, and only 3% were neutral and worse. So that means that our net promoter score for our high holiday services is 77. That puts us, in the category of world-class companies like Apple, the Ritz-Carlton, and Nordstrom's. We're actually higher than all but one of those. I'm not going to tell you which one. But we do quite well. Like, think of all the happy things in your life. I mean, like staying at the Ritz-Carlton. That's kind of what it's like to go to high holiday services, I guess, at Central Synagogue. But I think I want to reflect this back to you and say, we have this score because of you. You are our promoters. This is the reason we have a wait list at Central Synagogue. We don't advertise. It's you who go out and share your positive experience of Central. So I just want to say that we thank you for the way that you feel a deep sense of ownership in this community and a sense of pride. And this is what's reflected in this score. So I wanted to start with that. We also asked a question, which was, if you could name 3 words, any 3 words, of anything you want that describe your experience of the high holidays, what are they? And we made a word cloud with the bigger words being the words that are said the most often. That's how a word cloud works. So the words that were used most by our 1,000 respondents was spiritual was number 1, inspiring was number 2, meaningful was number 3, uplifting number 4, and beautiful as well. And we'd be happy to share that with anyone else. This whole presentation will be emailed to you, so you'll be able to see it. But anyway, I think that says a lot about how people feel, that if they could pick any word in the world, that the number 1 word was spiritual, describing their experiences of high holiday services at Central. Sharing just attendance and engagement. We have 82% of our congregation attended at least one high holiday service last year, with almost half of them attending at least 3 services or more. So people are really coming, and they're coming to services, and there are lots of reasons that people might be part of that 17%, including being out of town and being ill or whatever else. So that's a very, very high number. In fact, we also learned that 37% of our congregation live streamed at least one high holiday service over the last few years. That's huge. That means more than 1/3 of our community, not just the people that don't belong, those who belong, more than 1/3 live stream at least one high holiday service. So that might be because you're at home cooking dinner. It might be because it happened to be you're sick that year. It might be because you're in, I don't know, the Caribbean for the holiday for one reason or another. But people are using our live stream from our congregation, and I think that was also significant and interesting for us to learn that. In general, I think that there's often a lament in a lot of Reform synagogues that people are only 2-day-a-year Jews, or they only show up for the high holidays. And in fact, the number of the percentage of Reform Jews that attend services more than once a month, or even once a month, is only 17%. But at Central Synagogue, we're nearly double that, which is that 10% of our community say they attend most Shabbats and holidays, but another 22% they do at least once a month. So about 1/3 of our congregation show up at least once a month, which is really wonderful. And then we have We do have 15% who say they're only high holidays. That's a relatively small percentage. And then, a majority or a half or so say they come a few times a year. So let me see here. I wanted to share a couple of quotes that people gave overall. Let's see. Do I have to read it, or can you read it? Do you want me to read it? Okay. I think Central leadership puts so much thought into everything they do, but it's especially clear how much goes into this service. I feel grateful and lucky. The most moving services I've ever experienced. I like that Central never rests on its laurels. The fact that they are doing this process is a testament to that. So now, if I ended right there, we could all go home and feel really good about ourselves. we're doing everything great. But of course, that wouldn't be that much fun. And we know that there's always room for improvement, and we're always looking for those places where even if we're doing well, we could be doing even better. So you should know that there are not that many places where people are unhappy, but we really looked especially at those places where people feel like there's really room. So we looked at 3 major buckets in the survey. One was around community. One was around elements of the service, which include music and sermons and such. And then the last was around seating and space. So I'm going to go through each of these. And the first one is around community. And I want to just share kind of an important number. In terms of people who say, I feel a part of community at High Holiday Services, 72% agree with that statement, which is a very good number. And yet it's really interesting when we also ask, I'm satisfied with the number of people I know, that 41% say they don't feel like they know as many people as they want to know in this community. So I think that's really important, that while I think a majority feel they're connected, there's a very significant community that say, I really still wish I was more connected. I wish I knew more people. So that's something for us to be thinking about and working on. I'd like to share a few quotes on community that were sobering for me. While at Friday night services people are friendly and embracing, in general, High Holiday attendees are focused on their families and friends and rarely reach out to welcome people they don't know. Everyone talks about Central being a spiritual home, but I've been going for over 10 years and I feel utterly unknown and irrelevant. That cuts to the core. I think sitting near your friends helps build community and encourages children who want to attend. So these are a few quotes that the people wrote in when they had spaces to write in, and these are among the things that we saw represented in the overall data, but I think it puts a little color to hear some of the specific quotes that people have. We were interested, how do we measure if people feel a sense of community? So one of the questions was, how many people do you know by name at Central? And it was interesting. There's a small community, about 10, 11%, that know more than 50 names when they look around. So that's pretty good. There's another pretty large percentage that knows either 26 to 50 people or 11 to 24 people. So about half our congregation knows somewhere between 12 and over 50 people. But that also means that we have another half of the congregation that knows fewer than 10 people when they look around at services. And I think striking to think that a quarter of our congregation doesn't even know 5 people's names outside of their immediate family. That's kind of deeply affecting to me, to think that you might look around and not even know 5 people's names besides the family that you came with. And I will note that we asked the question, I didn't put the chart up here, of how many people want to know more. Not everybody wants to know more, but a good number of people want to know more than 5. So I think one of the things that was particularly striking is where we tried to kind of break this down a little bit is it really made a difference. As you might imagine, there was a high correlation between how many people you know and your sense of community at Central. That doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But we were curious, at what point does it really make a difference? How many people do you need to know where it really makes a difference that you feel more connected? And it seems like the magic number is knowing more than 11. So when you ask the question, I'm satisfied with the people I know, if you know more than 11, then 68% agree that I'm satisfied. But when you know 10 or fewer, then actually it becomes a much smaller number and you have a lot more people who disagree. We saw that on the chart that it was generally pretty high, 11 and above, but then when you got to fewer than 10 or less, 10 or fewer, you would it would actually change. And it was striking here too, in terms of I feel a part of community at High Holiday services when I know 11 or more people. That's a grand total of strongly agree and agree was like 88% feel a strong sense of community if they know at least 11 people. But think of how many people disagree suddenly when you get to 10 or fewer. So we say this because it's not just about numbers, but it helped us understand you kind of get to a quorum of, let's say, a dozen. Kind of fits in with the 12 tribes of Israel. You got to have your 12. And I think that was something that helped us understand at what point does it tip for people to feel a sense of community. So I'd like you to do one thing before we move forward. I want you to turn to someone next to you and learn at least one person's name right now. We're going to up this already because this is going to be something we work on, but just take a moment and introduce yourself to someone. I'm trying to think this. Okay. You did that very well. Thank you very much. We're going to find more opportunities to do this in a deeper way, but I just thought that we could at least leave knowing at least one more name than when we came in. Okay. Now we're going to move to service elements. These are things that are within the service that include everything from the kinds of things that we change and innovate to things like the music we use to how people feel about sermons. These are things that you might imagine people feel very emotional about and have very strong opinions about. And if you know the adage that when you have 2 Jews, you have 3 opinions, think about 7,000 Jews and do the math, how many opinions we are dealing with, and you'll see that reflected in this data, which I think was interesting because we were trying to understand if there's sometimes a mandate on some of these issues that we hear competing voices about, and frankly, sometimes we hear, from the people who feel the strongest are oftentimes on the polar end of the spectrum, and so I want to share just some of this data with you so that you can see how interesting our job is. Okay, so innovation, as you know, every year, the clergy team actually, or maybe you don't know this, we work with a clergy consultant and we work on some project of liturgy every single year. Every 6 weeks we come together for several hours and we are working on things. So these are some of the things that lead to some of the changes you've seen over the years at High Holidays or Saturday morning services or for some of our other holidays. It is part of what feeds us as clergy that we can do some of this work, and I hope that it keeps services fresh and relevant and alive for you. And we're wondering, how do people feel about the fact that we innovate? And this was a great question. The amount that clergy tries new things is about right. Like, how about that? 86% of our congregation think that we're doing about the right amount of innovation. It does say about 9% think it's a little too much innovation, and 4% say it's not enough. But generally speaking, the wide band says you're doing about right in terms of balancing tradition and innovation. So that was nice to see. Then also, the amount of explanation about prayers and ritual is 86% about right, meaning that there was a small percentage, I don't know what the math is now, I'm realizing, of saying it's a little too much, but almost no one said that. 14% said it's not quite enough. But generally speaking, it's about right. So I think it's good to know that we're doing this balance, which, by the way, we think about all the time. We don't do anything without kind of deep thought and contemplation and oftentimes assessing and bringing it to the congregation in some way. Music. So we are constantly doing new music, and I wanted to share some of the numbers here. If you look at the blue band, even without knowing the full story, you get a sense that in general, we're doing a pretty good job of keeping people pretty happy with the music, which is not an easy thing. But I will say that I will note the top bar says contemporary music. And do we do too much of it or not enough or about right? That's the question. And so on contemporary music, 74% say we do it about right. And this is where we had the most kind of, you do too much contemporary, that's 21% on that side. But you also had 5% say you don't do enough contemporary music. Okay, the next one was music that the clergy sing alone. 89% are happy. Opportunities to sing along, 91% of you say we get that right. Traditional Jewish music, 84% of you say we get that right. The last one is familiar versus new music, and in this case we had about 14% say you don't do enough familiar versus new. So if you look at that in general, I think that the general message is we're doing this pretty well and we're balancing it pretty well, but if there might be a little skew to a little bit less contemporary and a little more familiar, I will say that as a prior cantor of this congregation, we don't think of these musical choices as a completely democratic process, but I do know that our cantors deeply care about how people feel about this, and we have been paying attention to this data that has come back. So just wanted to share that. Let's get to the applause, because this is something we hear about from a few people with very vehement feelings about applause. But I will tell you that, it's hard to know, because there are some people, and you should know, they feel like applause makes it feel like we are in a performance space, and it feels out of place in a synagogue, and you don't grow up applauding in synagogue. And so some people feel very strongly we should not applaud. And then there are some people who feel very strongly that there is no way for them to communicate their sense of I'm with you, or I'm connected, or I approve, or I'm excited or joyful without being able to applaud. And so we were trying to figure out, let's put this question on the survey, and hopefully we'll get some mandate back that will help us understand. Well, we don't have a mandate. We have 49% agree that applause is an appropriate form of expression, and 26% disagree. I just took out the neutrals because they, whatever, that's fine. We do have to deal with the two ends of the spectrum. And it is striking that twice as many people feel like it's actually appropriate to applaud than the number of people who think it's not appropriate. But with 26% disagreeing that it's okay, that still means hundreds of people who filled out this survey don't think it's appropriate. So I'm not sure what to make of this. You guys know, if you've ever read the High Holiday material, we've actually invited people to not applaud, and you didn't listen. So it's, clearly there's a desire for people to want to express in some way. I will also share that I know that when we had last year the Israeli guests, the Ethiopian and Darfuri refugees who came and spoke, they shared with me that when they came up onto the bima of David Geffen Hall and they got this huge ovation, they said it was one of the most powerful, moving moments of their entire lives. And I think our congregation felt that too. So there is something about wanting to have some physical and audible way of expressing a relationship and communication that is challenging. So all I can say from this is we don't have a mandate. We'll continue to think about it. And maybe the best we could do is help to understand why the other side of this aisle feels the way they feel. Now let's get to the fun thing about sermons. So we always wonder, after we labor for months and months on these sermons, does anyone care? Is anyone talking about it? And it was very gratifying to see this. How often has the sermon been a topic of discussion at home after the service? 26% of you say it's always a topic of discussion, and another 41% say frequently, and 28% say sometimes, which means 95% of you say at least sometimes you talk about the sermon at home after you get home. Now, we didn't ask the question if you talked about it as in, I hated the rabbi's sermon. But I do think that just the fact that we're generating conversation for us is a win, because part of what we want to do is spark a sense of engagement with the ideas, even if it's not, for us it's not about like or dislike, it's about are we making you think about some of these issues that we're trying to bring forward. 89% of you say that the sermon affected my thinking during the year at least sometimes. You could see it's obviously a smaller amount that said always, but as the bar goes across. 80% of you say that the sermon prompted you to take some kind of action, of at least sometimes. And 67% said it prompted you to deepen your Jewish knowledge sometimes. So this was really very wonderful for us to see this, and I hope that continues to be the case, and that you would continue to be, we hear from you, and we really appreciate that, and we love that. We wondered, what about sermon topics? Because we hear from you. Probably the biggest thing I hear from congregants is some who feel very, very strongly that the most important thing that we should sermonize about at the high holidays are timeless topics like forgiveness and issues of, patience or gratitude or God, that we want to take those timeless Jewish traditional topics, and that's the most important thing. And then there are others who come to us and say, the most important thing is for you to talk about something relevant and with current events and political in some way. So we thought, well, let's see what the masses say. And I will say that the most meaningful sermon topics, 90% of you said, if it's something challenging. And I will tell you that this is part of what I love about working at Central Synagogue, that our community wants to be challenged. And so 90% of you said it's most meaningful when we get challenged by our sermon topics. But then the next two, almost at a dead heat, was current events and timeless themes. So you can tell this is why I get to give 2 sermons, and I usually do 1 on each. But just so you know that there's not a clear mandate here, although we separated out social justice, and that got 74%. And then we put Jewish text, that got 49%. And God coming in last, 34%. So, I mean, I just think it's interesting. And in terms of strongly agree that it's a meaningful sermon topic, it's less than 10% of our congregation wants me to talk about God, which I think is really interesting. I'm actually going to explore this a little bit more because I think there are a couple other questions that are telling around this issue of like what people connect to. So we asked the question, for me, high holidays are primarily about, and I'm going to just go down the line so you can see it if you can't read it, Jewish tradition, self-reflection and growth, Jewish community, hearing from clergy, dropping down to 29%, family. For me, high holidays are primarily about remembering loved ones, prayer, and then God, at 13%. One more. Central high holidays makes me feel connected to. So you recognize the difference between the last question. The last question was high holidays are primarily about in the theoretical. Now this is about high holidays at Central makes me feel connected to. And here 93% total say to Jewish tradition. Then 80% something bigger than myself. Then 79% say Reform Judaism, 75% say the larger Jewish community, 71% say my central community, 65% say my family, and then 55% God. So it's not lost on me that God has come in last in all of these questions. And I could kind of despair about this a little bit just because I'd like for us to be really engaging in this, but I actually think it's really interesting and I want to point out a couple of things. The first thing I want to point out is if you look here, the second highest answer was that it's about self-reflection and growth. For me, this is what actually a spiritual life is all about, is self-reflection and growth. And then when you look here, something bigger than myself was the second highest thing of what High Holiday Central at Central makes you feel. Now, something bigger than myself, you can call it that. I like to call it God, but that's okay. I recognize that God actually has a lot of connotations and external factors that make us think about it in maybe perhaps a specific way. I want to begin by saying I'm deeply respectful of those who don't believe in God and are firmly in that camp and don't want to ever believe in God and still come to services. That is wonderful. I'm not going to push anyone on that. But for those who actually might be interested in thinking about God and feel very spiritual and feel very connected to something bigger than themselves, but have such a problem with the Jewish view of God, well, for you out there, I'd like to say, let's continue the conversation, because I think that there's an interesting thing when the biggest word is spiritual on our word cloud, and yet God comes in last in every category. So there is some disconnect between the way Jews feel about spirituality, something bigger, self-transformation, but we don't call it God. So someday, we're going to continue that conversation about why Jews have such a hard time talking about God. Now, we're going to get to the last category, which is about high holiday seating system. And I'm sorry, these were a couple quotes I wanted to share with you that people offered about God. I've never been comfortable with Unetana Tokef. I try to tune it out. Some of the questions are hard to answer since I don't believe in God. And the music and cantorial singing washes over me and makes me connect to God and look inward. So sometimes music can be that vehicle when intellectually we don't really feel that connection. And it says, if a rabbi can see God this way, maybe there is room for me here. So, last category is around seating and space. And I wanted to share a few quotes about what people are thinking about, kind of unscripted, where they got to write in their answers about how they feel about seating and space in our sanctuary. I'm actually not sure how Central determines who gets tickets to the main sanctuary. Tenure? Money? Random selection? The fire taught us that it's not about where we are, but who we are. And if you weren't a member during the fire 20 years ago, there were services that were held in the Park Avenue Armory, so they were not in the sanctuary, and that's when people realized that it was not just about where we were. The energy and overwhelming sense of community at a packed David Geffen Hall is powerful and joyful. I feel a sense of community by sitting with my family in the same assigned seats that we have sat in for decades, surrounded by friends and families we feel connected to. So let's talk for a moment, because some of you are long time members, some of you are newer members, just a little bit of background on how we have this system of an assigned seating service and unassigned seating services. And you should know that this is as old as this sanctuary that you're sitting in. This comes from our archives. This is a pamphlet of the rules and regulations for the sale of pews of Temple Ahavat Hesed on Lexington Avenue and 55th Street. So Ahavat Hesed is the name of Central Synagogue before we changed it to Central and became a little bit less Jewish-y sounding. Anyway, the first thing it says there is, the temple will be open on Saturday afternoon, April 20th, 1872, from 2 to 6 p.m., for the purpose of giving members and purchasers an opportunity of selecting pews. So the way that you belonged to Central was that you purchased a pew, and your pew was your pew. And you should know that we have members, current members of Central Synagogue, who have been sitting in the pew that their family has sat in since 1872, since this synagogue opened. So in terms of a sense of deep connection to space and place, that really exists. And by the way, at the time that this was happening in 1872, virtually every synagogue did this. The way that you were, connected to a synagogue was you purchased your pew, and your name was on your pew. So this is sort of, and as you might imagine, since this has been the system in place since the sanctuary was opened, there is a deep sense of attachment for people who are part of the assigned seating service to be in their particular pew, surrounded by the same people that they've always sat with. And people ask us, how do you get into assigned seating? How do you get into the main sanctuary? Well, I'd like to tell you, well, it only happens when someone dies and then a pew opens up. But even when someone dies, they usually pass it on to their family members. So you should know there's very little turnover in the assigned seating service, meaning very few seats come open in any given year. And so people who are in them oftentimes for multiple generations in a family. So this is the assigned seating service, and it is, right now, there are no plans of making massive changes to the assigned seating service, but as I told you before, we always are thinking about how we continue to think about this. But I want to lift up other pieces of data that people brought to us around this. I do think that, and I would also say, of course, once we got to be bigger than 1,400 people, we could either say we can't grow anymore, or we change the system from owning a pew to a membership system, which is what most synagogues did. So we created a membership system, but then those who were in the first seating of this service would be in assigned seating, and we created a second service. And that second service has been all over the place. Most recently, it's been in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel 20 years ago. Then we've been in David Geffen Hall. And I think the beautiful thing is we've been able to create a sense, like the ancient Israelites who had a portable tabernacle. We realized that wherever our people and our Torah went, we could create a sacred and spiritual home. And I think that our David Geffen Hall services have been extraordinary. So I think that this is one of the things that we've learned along the way. That being said, let's talk a little bit about this. As I said in the beginning, overall satisfaction with High Holidays is extremely high, but the satisfaction with the seating system, not as much. So you only have, this is one of the few places where less than half of our community feels happy with something. 48% are happy with our seating system currently, and you have a full 21% who are actively unhappy about our seating system right now. A third of our congregants, without a prompt, wrote comments about the seating system, which is a very high number. That means we had over 350 comments about the seating system. 13% of them were generally positive. 37% were generally negative. There was another 12% that kind of was some variation of it being a classist system. Another 10% that talked about it being particularly confusing. The purple category were sort of mixed reviews that were sort of partly positive, partly negative, and then there were another 14% that were generally indifferent or other. So we actually like literally read every comment and categorized them. But it gives you some sense of like the open-ended comments being generally far more negative than positive around the seating system. I'll ask this question. Our current seating system is reflective of Central's values of creating an inclusive and welcoming community. And here again, it was striking. I took out anyone who was neutral, but you only had 38% agree that it was reflective of our values of being inclusive and welcoming, and you had 20% who disagreed. And among the people who were unhappy with High Holidays, it's particularly striking that they were most feeling that it was not reflective of our values was connected to them being the most unhappy. So there was a correlation between the people who are unhappy with the seating system, it being directly related to whether or not they thought was reflective of values of being inclusive and welcoming. Now, I want to bring up one other thing which I think is actually problematic in both services, and I'm just going to say it, which is late arrivals. And we asked the question about whether or not it was a problem for people. It's distracting to me when people arrive late to services. Interestingly, it bothered people in unassigned even more than assigned, but 39% agree that it's distracting. There was a pretty nice percentage that disagreed. And then in unassigned, 45% say it's distracting. So I would just say here, by the way, that if you ever grew up in an Orthodox or even conservative synagogue, you were almost like mandated to show up late to High Holiday services because that was just the culture. And not only that, but the services went on all day. In fact, my Orthodox friends talk about which book they bring to Yom Kippur services because everyone brings a book. Because there's just an assumption that you show up kind of when you show up and you read a book because they're going to pay attention for part of it and they're going to not pay attention for part of it. When Reform Judaism kind of took this service and shortened it considerably and took out all the additional pieces that were extraneous or repetitive, part of what we decided was there's a service that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and an arc to it and everything else. So I just would like to say that our clergy notices when people don't come on time, but I also want you to know that your own congregants really notice and feel distracted by the fact that for the first hour of a service, there will be people who are coming in. So this is just something to note. We've talked about it. We would be open to your ideas for some solutions around this, but just so people should know this. I think it's not a surprise to you, but people are deeply attached to this sanctuary. Before I came to Central Synagogue and I asked people, why do you like Central? I couldn't understand how many of them said, because our sanctuary is so beautiful. Because I kind of felt like, well, that seems like a superficial reason. Well, until I came here. And then there's something kind of magical about the pull of this place, and I think that people really feel it. So it was striking to read this. I feel a sense of community in the main sanctuary. 91% agree that they feel a sense of community when they're in our sanctuary. And in David Geffen Hall, 53% agree. Now, I think that's actually strikingly high for a place that is not a religious space at all. I think it's a testament to what we're able to do there, and I think it actually feels really wonderful. And it's also twice as big. So the fact that we can do that at 53% is pretty great, but it's almost half of what it feels like in the sanctuary. And in terms of feeling a sense of spirituality, I feel the sense of spirituality in the main sanctuary. 98% of our respondents said they agree, and there were 81% of them that say they strongly feel that. So there's just this deep pull that people feel in terms of a sense of spirituality being in this space. And in David Geffen Hall, we have 67% say they can feel spiritual in David Geffen Hall, which again, I think is a remarkable number, but the number of strongly agree is much smaller, and it's more like 2/3 as opposed to almost 100%. 79% of our congregations say they want to worship in the main sanctuary during the High Holidays, but only 43% are able to do so in our current system. So when I say 43%, that means we have people who are in our assigned seating service, and we also, for those who don't know, have a unassigned Kol Nidre service where we fill the sanctuary and do 2 services for Kol Nidre, and it's basically based on tenure and membership if you are invited to be a part of the Kol Nidre unassigned service. So between those 2 services, unassigned and the Kol Nidre, we do get 43% of our community able to be in the sanctuary for one service. Now, I have not said that on second day of Rosh Hashanah, it is open to everyone in the community, so anyone could come on second day, and it's an incredibly beautiful service, so I also recommend that. So these are some of the results of the survey which I thought were important for you to see and hear. And now I want to share that a few of the things that we want to do for the plan forward, because I think that we want to address some of the things we've learned. We put this survey out here because we wanted to think thoughtfully about some changes that we would be making. And so I want to share them with you now, knowing that I'm not going to be able to get into every nitty-gritty detail of all of them, nor do we feel that this is going to be the end of what we do, but this is the beginning. And so we want to share them with you, and we're excited about them. The first was around, I just wanted to remind you of what the goal was in the first place. A powerful, community-building, transformative high holiday worship that reflects Central's highest values as a Jewish community for as many people as possible. So, the plan forward around community. So, don't look at that slide for a minute because it's kind of confusing. But one of the things that we think about at Central is that we have built this congregation in some ways one relationship at a time. This is the philosophy that I learned from my mentor, Rabbi Peter Rubenstein, who did this brilliantly. And I do think that this place, part of the special sauce of Central Synagogue, is we are a large place, but for many, many people, it really feels like an intimate shul, and people have their people. But not everyone feels that way, as we learned. And so we really want to make sure that people really feel that they are not anonymous in this community. And we want people to feel like they are cared for by others, and that they feel responsible to others. This is what our sacred community is about. So it's very hard to measure how do you feel a sense of community, but we've devised a very short number which we're going to roll out at the high holidays this fall, but I'm giving you a short preview. We want everyone in this congregation who wants to have their 3, 6, 12. And let me explain what that means. Your 3. We want everyone in the community to have 3 people that they can name that they know would show up for them. Maybe would take them to a hospital visit if they needed, or would make sure that they weren't alone on their birthday, or who would help them if they had a Shiva minyan, God forbid. So everyone should have 3 people in the community they feel that way, that they know they would show up for me. 6, we're going to double it. You need to name your 6 of people that you would show up for them. And hopefully that's easier. And you would want to be able to name those 6 people that you'd say, I'd show up for you. I would take you if you needed me. I would show up for you for Shiva. And 12, well, we realize that 12 is the magic number of names you should know in the congregation to feel more connected to the synagogue. So we want everyone to know at least 12 people's names. I don't mean just name. You got to know their face and one little story about them, but 12 people in the congregation. So everyone at Central should have their 3, 6, 12. And we'll roll this out in the holidays and talk about how this is not just going to be something that happens right away. Many of you in this room already have your 3, 6, 12, but there are many, many people in our community who we know don't. At least a quarter don't even know more than 5 people's names. So this is part of something that we think about because we know at the heart of this community is relationship, and that will always be what we are. Let's look at the plan forward for services. So the balance of innovation, new and old, and tradition and learning. And we have many things that we have in store for the high holidays, but one thing I want to share with you, and we're very excited about, is we have a brand new Rosh Hashanah Machzor that we're going to roll out. We piloted this on the second day of Rosh Hashanah this year. So if you were here on second day, you actually got to see a pilot of it, but we took your feedback. We've been working on it. I want to say that Cantor Dan Mutlu has taken the lead on this and has been unbelievable. It is exquisitely beautiful. To begin with, it's just so much more aesthetically beautiful. But in addition to that, it has commentaries. It tells you a little bit why we bow in a certain place. It tells you sources of where prayers come from. So there's just much more in it, and it's richer. So we are really excited that's going to be something that we roll out at this year's High Holidays. And this is, again, in the spirit of continual innovation and relevance that we try to do. So that's around service elements that I wanted to share. And the last is space and seating, because there was a lot of questions, and maybe the area of the most sort of dissatisfaction around this. So we want to make a more transparent and less confusing seating system. We want to enable all congregants who want to have at least one service in the main sanctuary. It was pretty clear to us that people really want to have an opportunity to be in the main sanctuary, if possible, for at least one service. That's not just second day Rosh Hashanah, but a service. So, and I would add to this goal that we want to also create that sense of community. I think what's beautiful about assigned seating is there's a real sense of community in assigned seating because the same families have been in that same service for many, many years, if not generations. And so that sense of community, which is deep and beautiful and part of what we aspire to create, we want to aspire to create that for a larger community at Central. So what we are going to do and roll out, dun, 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 is a double Rosh Hashanah morning and double Yom Kippur morning services in the sanctuary. So what that means, and I just want to make sure that first of all that you know, you're like, can the clergy do that? Well, I can attest that when I first was cantor here, we used to do double Rosh Hashanah morning services. And we did one at 8:45 and one at 11:45. That's not necessarily going to be the timing of these services coming up, but we did that for many years until we moved to David Geffen Hall permanently for all the services. But just know that it's not, we are very excited to be doing this, but we will be doing that. So between the three services now, meaning Rosh Hashanah morning, Kol Nidre night, and Yom Kippur morning, unassigned in the sanctuary, between those three services, everyone in our congregation who is in unassigned seating will have the opportunity to be in at least one service, not at least, in one service in the sanctuary for the holidays. And let me explain just quickly what that might look like. So if you are in assigned seating, you will not have major changes to your schedule. However, on Rosh Hashanah day, your service will be early, and on Yom Kippur day, your service will be the late service. So aside from that, all your tickets are the same if you were in assigned seating. If you are, you can choose to be in David Geffen Hall, meaning that like most of you who are unassigned, you are in David Geffen Hall for all your services. If that is your preference, because it's a beautiful service, or because you live next door to Lincoln Center, or whatever it is, you can choose to stay in David Geffen Hall for all your services. I will say that one of the pluses of David Geffen Hall is that it will always have a very convenient service time, as opposed to the double sanctuary, which are going to be squeezing in two services. So the David Geffen Hall option is great. I want to also make sure that it's clear that the clergy rotation will continue to happen through all of the services. You will not only be getting one set of clergy in any location. We will rotate through all of them as we always have, and we will invest in both services with the full panoply of musicians and special speakers and everything else we do will happen in both venues. So there will be the highest quality service in both places. And if you attend all the services, you will see every clergy person. You will hear both of my sermons. You will hear 2 out of 3 of the other rabbis' sermons. You will see both cantors. Although this year, if you didn't see the very happy news, Cantor Julia Cadrena is expecting a baby in August, which is amazing. But that does mean she's probably not going to make it to the high holidays this year for the best reason. And so we are really happy that Shani Ben Or, who has been with us for many years, will be the second cantor for our services, and she's extraordinary. So that's for this year, so you should know. So here's where it gets just making sure that this is the biggest change. There are now 3 choices for people who are unassigned. They can choose to be in the sanctuary for one of the 3 services, either Rosh Hashanah day, which is going to be in the main sanctuary late, Kol Nidre, which is in the main sanctuary early, or Yom Kippur day, which is in the main sanctuary early. And the way that we're going to do this is if you already are one of the people who are in Kol Nidre, you have first choice to stay in that service because that might be a service you've been in for a decade or more, and we want people to be able to choose that first. So you will get priority if you've already been in Kol Nidre services. And then we will invite people to put in their first and second choice for which service they'd like to be in. And we want to be as transparent as possible. The way we're going to place you into your first, we're going to try to accommodate everyone's first choice. If we're not, what we're going to do is base it on your tenure of membership. So someone who's been a member for 25 years is going to have a higher priority of someone who's been here for 2 years. And also prioritizing people being paired, if you ask for it, with family members and even friends. So we will have space on the form for you to put your first and second choice. We will have space on your form to say, please seat me with these family or friends. And we will try to put people together because the goal is to create the sense of community in that service. You should know that the service that you get placed in, we hope is the one you stay in for a really long time because we do not want to redo this every year. And not only that, we really want you to create a sense of knowing who's part of your sanctuary service, Kol Nidre, or Rosh Hashanah morning, or Yom Kippur morning. So we are really going to ask people to pick carefully, and we're going to minimize the amount of change that happens from one year to another. The way this is going to work is we will, also, by the way, if you get your thing in by the date, which is going to be May 27th, just so you know, if you get your suggestions in by that date, we will do the seating of that first, and then people who get in after will not be prioritized the way people who got their form in on time. So just, I'm telling you this, that it's important to get it in on time in terms of if you have a strong preference for what service you're going to be in. So, I just want to make clear kind of next steps here. Tomorrow, there is going to be a follow-up email with frequently asked questions. This is not going to be the format for me to take a bunch of questions, but we're all available. Elizabeth Brown is available, our Director of Member Services, who's been really running this. But we are going to send out a frequently asked questions sheet tomorrow to the entire membership, along with a link to this talk and along with some instructions about this so that people all know. But that's going to go out tomorrow. On the 18th of March, we will have your seating choice form will be sent out. There's not a ton of time between that and May 27th, which is your deadline to submit your selections to Central. And then on June 3rd, we will schedule, post the schedules, and we'll open up guest tickets, and then I'm sure we're going to get a rash of people saying they want to switch or do whatever, or we didn't get the form in. But we're going to do our best. So please be patient with us. This is a new thing that we're trying, and we're trying to do it to accommodate and speak to the needs of our community. So this is why we're doing it. We're excited to do it. We feel that it will improve the experience of the vast majority of our members. And of course, but we also know that the David Geffen Hall service has been amazing, and if that's where you'd like to stay, we invite you to do that as well. So, in conclusion, I'll do that first. I would just say that Central, we really value your opinion. I want to just say thank you for so many of you who filled out this survey, who've been engaged. I want to particularly thank the leaders who've been deeply involved in these conversations and helped us think this through. As I said again, including Jeffrey Goldstein, our board, our president, Marcia, Elizabeth Brown. It has really been invaluable, your leadership in helping us come to this. And I hope we can't make everybody happy at Central in terms of all the things that have come at us, but we really, really care, and we will really listen, and we value your opinions. And I hope you like the changes. If you don't, I can almost promise you at some point it'll continue to change, because that's the way things work here. And I think that this sense of a relentless pursuit for continuing to improve the experience for our community is has been the hallmark of who Central is, and part of what has made us great for the last 180 years, and hopefully will keep us relevant and great for the next 180 at least. And to end by saying that we're going to have an incredible celebration of Central Synagogue's 180th birthday on November 12th, and I just thought you should save the date for that because you do not want to miss it. And there is still a few slots open for our Israel trip, which is over 130 people already, which is quite amazing, our biggest trip ever to Central, especially for adults traveling not with children. We have room, so we'd love to have you if that's going to be the case. And to say that we are deeply grateful, speaking on behalf of the clergy and staff team, to work in a place that supports this kind of thinking, this kind of risk-taking, and also the kind of support and thoughtfulness that we get from this community. To be in a community that continues to challenge us to be at our best is part of what makes this job thrilling for us to be here. So thank you for coming out tonight. I want us to end on a beautiful, warm note, so I'm going to invite up our cantors to lead us in song, reflecting sort of the theme of this holiday, and say thank you again.
So, as Rabbi Buchdahl showed you, we're working on this new machzor, and it's been in the shop for many years, actually, and we're so excited about it. One of the things that we realized when we were working on the machzor is that our original machzor didn't have a title. And we thought that a title could be a great way to encapsulate the way that we want to move forward in the High Holy Days, an intention, a way to focus on something important and meaningful. And so you may have noticed that on the cover, it said, "Open our hearts, Petach Libenu," and that is the title of our Machzor. And it comes from a prayer from the Amidah, which says, "Open our hearts, O God, to your Torah, so that our souls may follow your mitzvot and your ways." So I'm going to teach you this melody for a song that I wrote, a new song for the High Holy Days, and I hope that you find it easy to sing, and I'm just going to teach it to you today. And I'm going to advance one slide here so you can see words on this side of the screen. So let's see. There it is. So open our hearts, and the only words you really need are open our hearts to you, and Petach Libenu. So if you can't see those small words here, don't worry about it. You'll just repeat after me. So if you repeat after me, open our hearts, try that. Open our hearts. Beautiful. Then we'll sing, open our hearts to you. Open our hearts to you. I'll show you how those fit together. Open our hearts to you. Try that. Open our hearts to you. The only other thing you need in this song is Petach Libenu. It's the only other Hebrew I'll make you sing tonight. And it sounds exactly the same pretty much as what you just sang. So I'll sing some English text, and then we'll sing Petach Libenu. Try that. Petach Libenu. Beautiful. And then I'll sing a little bit more, and then you'll sing Petach Libenu. Petach Libenu. So that's it. That's the song. And just follow us. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. Bring us close to your ways and your wisdom. Petach Libenu. Let us know you are here and not hidden. Petach Libenu. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. With the help of your love and forgiveness. Petach Libenu. Let our souls come again to your nearness. Petach Libenu. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. Open our hearts. Open our hearts to you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you for coming.